Okay, the August 13th, 2020 meeting of the Woodbridge Township Board of Education, please come to order. Please rise for a salute to the flag and a moment of silence. Okay, roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Here.
Ms. Bourdain?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Molnar?
Here.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes, here.
Mr. Treebwasser?
Here.
Mr. Velez?
Here.
Mr. Delapietro?
Here. Okay, Mr. Secretary, as required by the Sunshine Law, please read the notice of meetings.
Thank you, Mr. President. The New Jersey Open Public Meetings Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend the meetings of public bodies at which any business affecting their interest is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with the provisions of this Act, the Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be published by having the date, time, and place thereof posted as follows. August 6th, 2020, email to the Home News Tribune, the Star Ledger, and the Municipal Clerk's Office, posted in Avenel Middle School, Ross Street School Number 11, Board of Education Administration Building, and published on the school district website.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Finance and Insurance Agenda, Mr. Tamburello.
Thank you, Mr. President. Finance and Insurance Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Business Administrator Board Secretary, presents the following single item. I move for the adoption of the foregoing one item this evening.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Ms. Bourdain. I have a motion on the floor by Mr. Tamburello, seconded by Ms. Bourdain. Any questions or comments from the board?
Through the Board President.
Mr. Tamburello?
So the public knows why we're having a special meeting this evening. It's due to the reduction in state aid, the administration and the board had to make cuts to the 2021-22 school year, and that's what we are voting on this evening. After several meetings and discussions and phone calls with board members and the administration, I guess I'm glad to say we've came up with cuts that I think hold the least people most harmless, maintains our staff, and it was a very thoughtful and deliberate discussion on what could get cut, and it is what it is, and that's what we're voting on this evening in case the public wasn't aware of why we're having a special meeting.
Okay.
But thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Tamburello. Okay, any other comments or questions from the board? Okay, seeing none, roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdain?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Molnar?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Treebwasser?
Yes.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes. Okay, Dr. Zega?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sure the public is aware that yesterday the governor made an announcement about changes to districts reopening and restarting in September. 2 months ago, less than 2 months ago, we were tasked as a district, as were the other districts in New Jersey, to devise a reentry plan in September. The guidelines given to us at that point were in-person only. There was no option for parents or districts to choose any remote option. Our committee and our Board of Education worked on a plan that would be the safest plan for students and staff under those guidelines. A few weeks later, more news from Trenton, where the guidelines changed and the remote learning for students as an option would be permitted. Now, that would also include a hybrid in-person component. Again, our committee formed a plan that was the safest possible plan for both students and staff. Yesterday, more news from Trenton. The governor announced that, and through an executive order today, that districts can opt to open in September fully remote with no in-person instruction. Again, our committee will go back to the drawing board, amend our plan, and come up with the safest possible option under these new guidelines for both students and staff. I just wanted to let the residents and the students and the parents know that we are working on the plan, we're revising our plan, and we will be able to make an announcement very, very shortly. But as you can see, over the less than 2 months, we've had to make some major changes because of the guidelines that have changed from Trenton. And that's nobody's fault in Trenton, but that is the reality. To offer less than 2 months ago in-person only and no remote, and now fully remote, and you don't have to have in-person, that is a major, major shift. And there are many, many different variables that we have to address when we address our plan. So we are working on our plan. We'll have it very, very soon, and we hope to present it to the board and for discussion next week. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Dr. Zaga. Okay, in keeping with past practice, we will open this portion of the meeting for questions and statements from the public. If you wish to say something, state your name, section of the township in which you reside. Please limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes in accordance with Regulation 1100D. For those residents who are unable to attend tonight's meeting in person, you can email your questions and statements to the superintendent at woodbridge.k12.nj.us.
All right, David Pikowitz, Island. First, one thing, normally the past practice has been in-person meetings that the board would take comments at each part of the agenda and then have the public comment at the end. That didn't happen today, so one of the things I'd like to know when I complete the comments is that a permanent change? Was that something that happened by accident? Or, so what are we doing? Normally, we would have an opportunity to comment during the, let's say, the finance portion of the agenda. So regarding the finance portion of the agenda, we were just told there are cuts being made. What we weren't told is what those cuts were. And I don't see anything on the website, or I haven't seen anything on the website to show us. So I would like to hear where cuts are being made, how you're avoiding cutting staff. Are we cutting any educational programs? And if so, what? I did wonder, back when the state first asked for reopening plans, one of the comments the state made was to inquire of people who take busing, whether they plan to take the buses or not. I did not notice that. I saw it on the anonymous survey we had at the beginning. I did not notice it on the specific survey we later had, although since I chose remote, maybe I wasn't asked, maybe other people were. So I am wondering if that was looked into in terms of busing is overall. Obviously, there's courtesy busing too, on top of that. The second area I wanted to ask about regarding reopening specifically, and I know some of this is covered by the governor's new requirements for a new plan, is in terms of ventilation for those that are in here in person. So what the plan currently said, as I recall, is it said something to the nature of there will be ventilation in the classrooms. Didn't specifically talk about buses, didn't specifically talk about anything else. And then it gave an example, open windows. So my question about that is, obviously right now we're standing, or I'm standing, you're sitting in a new building which has a modern ventilation system. Most of our schools don't have that. In most of our schools, even if I opened a window, the air wouldn't really circulate much at all unless you're also going to open the doors. Are you going to add, let's say, regular fans to push air out? Are you going to have air cleaners to clean the air and circulate within the classroom? Because obviously you're talking about sitting for a period of time, let's say upwards of an hour, with or without masks. It doesn't really matter. At some point, everybody's air is kind of mixing all together, but not really leaving the room. So I would like to know if that's being looked at, if there'll be more specificity in terms of the plan, so we see what the school's actually doing. An example of open windows doesn't tell us, are they required? Must every teacher do it? Will it be done in the middle of winter, even if it's 20 degrees outside? So I'd be curious to know a little more about the ventilation and what's being looked at. So that's basically my comments. I'd be happy to hear the responses.
Mr. President, I'll start with the ventilation. The classrooms that don't have central air units have unit ventilators, which are units that are against the wall, against an exterior wall, and they provide a fresh air exchange for the classroom so many times per hour. I don't recall exactly how many, but it's well within acceptable standards. So even though there's no central air unit, all of our classrooms have unit ventilators. And those are maintained according to manufacturer specifications. They have filters in them that filter the air coming in from the outside. The filters are replaced on a regularly scheduled maintenance plan that is held at each school. Thank you, Mr. President.
And were there answers about the cuts being made, or whether you inquired about whether parents would actually utilize the busing so you could cut potential routes? And as well as, did we permanently change the way meetings work to not take questions during the portion of a specific agenda?
Yeah, I mean, this thing on? It's on? It is, okay. Mr. Pinkowitz, I think it's the practice of the board, generally speaking, for in-person meetings to do comments during the meeting before we have votes. But the board is sort of constantly reevaluating the most effective way for meetings to go. I don't necessarily know that what we're doing today is a precedent for other meetings, but this board, for example, has many more comment periods than any of the boards I represent throughout the state of New Jersey. So it's up to this board on how it wants to proceed going forward. But I think we've been following this same sort of standard since we've been doing Zoom meetings. I don't know that this means anything in particular. I don't know that the board has even really thought about it. I think we were just using the same format we've been using over the last couple of months, really since March, but I wouldn't read it one way or the other. I'll have to sit with the board president and some of the board members and decide how they want to proceed going forward.
Okay.
Any other question was where the cuts came from? Mr. Wolferman, you have?
Yeah, I can give a brief description, and certainly you can come email my office for the more specific even, but we cut in new curriculum that was unable by timing over the summer to be started. So we were able to cut some new curriculum that we hope to implement next year, should we be back into normal funding. We also eliminated we had a district-wide nurse that we were going to add. We elected not to do that for this year. It's not something we had in the past. Again, these are things we can look to add in the future. We were able to cut on some insurances that we got. The actual numbers came in after the budget was done in March. We got some new numbers that we were able to reduce the totals for that. We also reduced in some areas where we would not hire additional staff. It wouldn't cut any of the current staff. It was just we decided that we had some budgeted amounts for additional staff, new staff that we don't feel we're going to need. And we also have maintenance reserves and capital reserves that will cover a great deal of things that would have come out of the budget. We can go and do projects from the capital reserves and maintenance reserves that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. So those are the highlights, I would say.
Thanks. And you say you'll have to request in person, there won't be anything posted on the website? We have to request like either a open request?
As far as being on the website, that I would defer to the committee or Dr. Zaga.
Mr. President?
Mr. Harris?
Through the chair, I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Wolferman, for highlighting those two things. I think probably 2 points that ought to be made would be, and sometimes it's a little hard to hear in here with the mask on and the new acoustics, but there's no reduction in force, so no existing employee who was scheduled to work this year will be losing their job. That was a priority of the board. And then by and large, going item by item with the Finance and Insurance Committee, as well as the Business Administrator, it is a belt tightening as we've had in recent years, some smart spending on behalf of the business department, where we've run a number of sizable surpluses. Quite honestly, sometimes the surpluses are a little larger than some members on the finance committee, including myself, necessarily approve of. But in this particular year, having what was probably over budgeted in numerous line items, those items, fortunately, through some belt tightening, we're able to take money from those items and plug our unexpected budget hole of $8.1 million. So, you know, none of this was ideal cutting. Certainly, I wish, you know, as I know Mr. Treebwasser and I agree, and I'm sure the other members, we wish we could have spent more money on some of those new curriculums that we were very proud to approve back during the budget process. But when you lose $8.1 million, it's just a tremendous blow to our budget. And I think tonight we're making the right appropriate moves that don't impact current programs as well as don't hurt any of our 1,900 employees. So it's, you know, I just wanted to highlight those things for you, Mr. Pinkowitz, as well as the rest of the public, and thank the board for supporting tonight's necessary move. So thank you, Mr. President, for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Bush? Yeah, and Mr. President, one more thing. I'm sorry we keep ping-ponging between these issues, but Mr. Pinkowitz raised some, I think, important issues, both about the budget cuts as well as the public comment. As part of one thing I forgot to mention, as part of this board's continuing interest in getting feedback from the community, we're doing something obviously highly unprecedented tonight in this district. Because of the concerns over the possibility of not having enough space for people physically attending the meeting, the board has asked for public comments by way of email. And those emails will be read publicly, and that'll be happening tonight as well. I don't know how many emails we've received. I know we've received at least one. But, you know, I don't know how we're even going to read this. This is the first time we've ever done this in this district. But again, there's no playbook for any of this, including, for example, running a public meeting under these circumstances. So we're just doing our best. And I hope you and the community bear with us as we do our best.
Through the board president.
Mr. Tamburello?
I think it's also important to note, maybe Dr. Zager or Mr. Wolferman can elaborate, that by no means are our hands tied with these cuts. If the need arises in December or January to add money to any one of these line items, the board votes on it and then the need is there, we absolutely will do it. So while this is certainly a framework, we still have that flexibility to add to these line items at any time throughout the year. We could readopt the budget like we always do. But again, if Dr. Zager or Mr. Wolferman wants to elaborate, you know, we do have that flexibility going forward.
Mr. President, Mr. Tamburello, that is correct. We can make changes. I think it's also important to note that once we knew that budget cuts were imminent and purchasing PPE was going to be a major unbudgeted expense, that we kind of halted all spending, including our usual summer curriculum committees. And that's where you see some of the cuts coming from. So the reason why those committees are cut is because we didn't know how much PPE we were going to need to purchase, and we didn't know how much our budget would be cut. So even if we were to reinstate those into the budget now in less than 3 weeks, it's not enough time to implement those curriculum changes. So as Mr. Tamburello said, if we need to make a transfer once school starts or during the year, we could certainly do that. Thank you.
Any other comments from the public?
I hope you can hear me with this on. Amber Jarrett, Woodbridge proper. I was reading over the reopening plan, and I had some questions about virtual learning in particular. When I was reading the playbook, I was glad to see the requirement for some live office hours, but I do personally believe students would benefit significantly from the opportunity to interact daily with the teacher in this format. A student who's stuck or struggling shouldn't have to wait 2 and potentially 4 or 5 days. If it's Thursday and you missed your teacher's office hours, you may have to wait until Tuesday to get help, and that's a problem. Many learning issues also cannot be addressed just through an email response from the teacher. My district required a minimum of 30 minutes daily in the spring after those initial 2 weeks. And that's going to increase to an hour daily. In kindergarten, particularly because I'm a kindergarten teacher, we use those live meetings for small group instruction to differentiate like content areas that was introduced in recorded lessons by the teacher. So like guided reading, we played math games, related to the new skills. We hosted writing conferences, so on. I'm just wondering if Woodbridge is going to offer also additional guidelines to teachers about ensuring that there's a balance between those synchronous activities that we know foster discussion, promote interaction between students that they desperately need right now, and provide an opportunity for teachers to informally assess students and adjust the instruction with those asynchronous lessons that obviously need to be offered for flexibility. Because right now in the plan, it just says it's a combination of both, but it's very vague about the expectations and what kind of balance is going to exist. In addition, in my district, teachers, beginning again in the spring, were required to have students submit weekly assignments via Google Classroom. So in kindergarten, again, it was as simple as a picture of a writing sample, photo of your math journal, whatever. But everything collected had to have some type of specific feedback or comment. Sometimes it was as simple as, if it was a writing sample, it's like, oh, Johnny, I love the way you use spaces, remember to use a comma, whatever. But it allowed for support and a level of scaffolding that was similar to what you would do in the classroom. I know my son received a lot of grades, but he received almost no comments and no feedback from a teacher. And a letter or a number really doesn't mean anything without something else attached to it. So that's another issue. My district had done a comprehensive survey at the closing of the school year about virtual learning that occurred, and really asked parents, what worked, what didn't work, et cetera. I'm not sure if Woodbridge did something similar. I only saw the one about your preferred delivery of instruction, whether virtual or in person. So if you did something else, I apologize. But I know for us it was incredibly helpful in planning to kind of figure out what worked for different types of parents and what didn't work for different families, et cetera. And we were able to use that going forward for this year. I saw there were 3 parents on the reopening plan committee, but again, it's great that parents were included, but I'm concerned with what a small sample size that was, and I'm not sure how representative that group would have been in terms of grade levels, parents' working status, single-parent homes, those who ride the bus, those who receive special ed services, et cetera. So those are all things principals know about, so I guess I'm curious how those 3 women were chosen and how you plan on collecting feedback from parents in the future. The next thing, in terms of accountability, it says in the plan that access to standards-based instruction of the same quality and rigor that is afforded to all other students in the school. So I'm curious how you plan on ensuring that. Again, in my district, we were all required to utilize Google Classroom after those first 2 weeks, and we had to add our principals and content supervisors to our classroom so that they had access to all of our lessons, recordings, et cetera. So they could go and see what kind of instruction students were receiving. And it wasn't for an evaluative purpose, but it was to ensure that students were receiving equal access to quality instruction, because there was a lot of variability for my son too. And I know I'm a teacher, I know this spring was hard, but in the 4th marking period, well into this, my student had a STEM class for 8th grade. An entire week consisted of help your parents, keep a list of what you did, and then have them grade you. I'm not sure how that's related to STEM, but to say I was disappointed as an educator is an understatement. It also allows for continuity of instruction, so if a teacher becomes ill, an administrator or principal can take lessons from the same grade level and put them in there. And finally, totally not related to any of this, I recently became aware of a painting in the auditorium of Woodbridge Middle School that is very offensive. I'm embarrassed to say I never even noticed it before, but it was shared recently on social media. And I don't know if you know this painting, but it features a black man kneeling on his knees with broken shackles as Abraham Lincoln is elevated over him. There's also a Native American and some other historical references. But the caption, I think, is what bothers me the most. It says, "Our achievements." I just feel like that needs to be addressed. And it's more than a school issue. That's a district issue. And it perpetuates an inaccurate history. And it's it's awful. So, thank you.
Mr. President, about the mural, I guess Ms. Jarrett's talking about the mural that's in Woodbridge Middle School. So we got to look at the context of the mural. The mural was done as part of the WPA when Franklin Roosevelt was president, part of the New Deal. And it was a way to get people out of the Depression, artists that were starving, it was an opportunity for them to be put to work to paint murals. There were murals painted all throughout the country. The mural at Woodbridge Middle School, and it does say achievements, it's supposed to, and you got to put it in the context of the time. It was, 19, I don't know if it was 32 or 33 when it was painted, and it was painted by a resident of Colonia, New Jersey. And it was to depict where we have come in America to that point. There's George Washington, I believe, in the top corner, depicting the revolution, how we won our freedom from the British. There's a Native American girl with a couple Western, how we moved west and expanded.
Genocide?
Well, listen, we could debate that, but back then, we expanded the country. I'm not going to go into the specifics of what was done. All I know is we went west, and that was to depict, expanding the country to the west. Now, how that happened and how you want to determine that, I'm just going by what the mural is supposed to depict. And then it's Abraham Lincoln with a slave bowing to him with the broken shackles. And that was to depict, the end of slavery. But, I'm going to say something. When we come to, Abraham Lincoln, if we go back in time on August 28, 1963, Martin Luther King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. And he did it on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. And Martin Luther King, said in that speech, "I am happy to join you today, what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration of freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American whose symbolic shadow we stand signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and a momentous decree came and a great beacon of light to hopes of millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in flames and withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to the end of a long night of captivity." And Martin Luther King goes on to, in that speech, to say how 100 years later we stand here and that the Negro is still not free. And that's how the civil rights movement, and that's what that came. But Martin Luther King, in his speech, emphasized the act of the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slave. That's what that picture is depicting with the shackles being broke. So we could debate now what everybody feels of the painting. I'm just trying to give you a perspective of how and when the painting was done. Now, I'm not saying I agree with everything in the painting, but that's just a little bit of a history about the painting. It just wasn't painted 2 years ago or 3 years ago. It's, it's been there since the 1930s. So that just...
Can I just ask a question? Isn't it really important as a society and as an education?
Hang on,
Okay, I'll email you then.
Okay.
Or I'll just come to the next meeting.
Listen, we're never going to get over the fact of there was slavery in this country. There was. It was horrible. And the whole idea of history is to learn from history so we never forget. We can't just sponge out things that happened in the past if we agree with it or we don't agree with it.
But we can't also just give the white perspective of it.
okay, we're going to table this.
Well, yeah, that's why I said, the little stories behind the mural are what we're here debating, and I don't want to get into that. I just wanted to get into what the mural, when it was painted, the perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Molnar. Any other comments or questions from the public? Is there any emails? Oh, hang on.
Hi, my name is Charity Warren. These are some questions that my mom asked. She couldn't be here today. She asked about how they're going to be providing, PPE for students and families, especially if they are planning on attending school. How would that work, especially for certain students? They actually haven't been going outside mostly because they don't have access to these materials. So what type of plan does the board have in place to, ensure that students, if they, feel the need to attend, if they don't have access to, masks like other people, how are we going to be doing that for them? So that's kind of what she asked.
Okay, the question was how we're going to provide PPE.
So we will have, right now, our plan is not to provide for the students because right now, a mask is worn by most of the planet, and it's more of a personal item than it is a school-issued item. So we wouldn't want to give students masks or require them to wear masks that the district purchased and they might be uncomfortable with. So students have the option of wearing a mask or a shield, and even students who have certain situations may be exempt from wearing a mask at all. That being said, I always use the analogy of pencils and pens. If you come to school without a pencil or pen, there will be ones available. You know, we won't send you home because you don't have a pencil or pen, and we won't send you home because you don't have a mask. We will have them available, but we're just not providing them.
Got it. And then my other question was kind of like, going back to Ms. Jarrett's point about like parent involvement. So is there any way to get more parents involved? Like I know that, my mom told me that, the school has been calling her and asking her about, whether or not my siblings were going to be returning in the fall. And, that could have been a perfect opportunity to ask parents, because like calling by phone is, you're more likely to get a response rather than, maybe saying Board of Ed meeting or posting on the website. Is there a way for you all to, make a call to, parents within the community to, get involved in this committee? Because 3 parents is definitely not enough. Not even like most schools, PTAs don't even have 3 parents. And those are individual schools. So is there a way for, the board to, reach out like and call while they're making these calls to ask parents, to get involved, especially to involve people within different backgrounds?
So it turns out that the parents who are on that committee had emailed me questions, and I asked them if they would want to be on the committee, and that's how it came about. But we have, I believe, over 60 people on the committee, and many of them, although they are teachers, they are also parents, both in the district and not in the district. So we have many groups who fit different roles on the committee. I will tell you that the parents who are on the committee have been had a very high level of participation. They brought some wonderful insight to our decision making, and we certainly appreciate their participation.
Got it. And then my last question is about like, surveys about like the previous semester. So like, is there like, what steps was taken to, ensure that students, actually felt supported during this, like during the time that they were at school, to double check that they were learning everything possible, like what Ms. Jarrett just mentioned about her child and how, they were being just given like any type of work that didn't even relate to the material being given. So what type of measures are being taken? Like I know they sent home a survey, but like I saw what the survey looked like, and it didn't look like anything that would actually, get students to get actual feedback for both teachers, for parents, for administrators to understand like how well, online learning went so that they could improve, given these like this summer to, really make this time meaningful. Because like I worked at a summer camp with kids virtually, and I was a teacher for 5 weeks, and the amount of, curriculum sending, the amount of updates I had to give, the amount of surveys I had to fill out, as well as the students and the parents had to fill out. And I feel like that extensive process versus like a whole district was just not comparable at all. So I'm wondering what steps and what surveys are actually being taken to ensure that, the education that is meant to be taught curriculum-wise is actually being implemented, and that students can give good feedback so teachers can actually improve what they're doing and administrators can keep up.
Mr. President, we did administer a parent survey last year, and part of the survey was an open response, and we had, I believe, over 6,500 responses. And we took that data and we found trends in it. As Ms. Jarrett said, one of the most glaring failures of the spring distance learning was there was not consistent time, visual meeting time between the student and the parent. Between the student and the teacher. So that is a priority with our new plan, and the plan that's on the website now, that's all being revised again as soon as the governor, turned off his mic yesterday. We went back to work to revise the plan, so we're back at it again. But one of the things that we've been talking about for the past 3 months is the main weakness that we saw in the plan last year that was indicated by the parents on the survey was that they needed more time face time between the student and the teacher, and we will certainly address that come this fall.
Thank you.
Any other comments? We have an email.
Okay. The governor and DOE announcement said schools may go 100% remote if they cannot safely open or answer to the affirmative on all the DOE checklist questions. Has Woodbridge already submitted their plan to the county office, stating that they could open on hybrid schedules safely? The answer is yes. We have submitted a plan, but as I previously mentioned, that plan is now under review after the new guidelines from the governor. And the follow-up question is, if yes, why would there be a change in the plan? And as I said before, we want to provide the safest possible learning environment for our students and our staff, given the current guidelines. The plan that was previously submitted was written under different guidelines. Now, the rules, basically the rules have changed, so now we have to go back as a committee and talk about, with our parents and with our teachers and with our administrators, what is our safest option as a district. And part of the conversation, just very quickly, part of the conversation that we talk about is not only students are choosing to teach remotely, but teachers have different issues where they might not be able to report to work, which is fair. The other thing is, any time that there's a positive test in the school or a positive case in the school, or an interaction with a staff member or a student with somebody who is symptomatic, there's a required quarantine time. So if a teacher is in contact with somebody who is symptomatic or contact with someone who has tested positive, now that there's a quarantine time where that teacher now, if they were in person, cannot come to school in person. And we already know that there's going to be a significant shortage of substitute teachers. So this is evolving into a staffing problem and a labor issue, and as well as a health issue. So we don't want to have a plan where we bring students into school and A, they're not safe, and B, they're not with a live teacher, because that's the only reason why, or that's the main reason why the parents are sending the kids to school. So we want to make sure we can guarantee safety and in-person instruction with their teacher. If we can't guarantee that, then the whole plan falls apart. So, but we've said from the beginning, our plans are based on student and teacher, staff safety. That is the number one priority.
Any other comments or questions from the public? Any more emails?
Do you want to just, is there a name and address associated with that email, just for the record, for Ms. Rooney's minutes purposes?
Sure. Brian Detlefson, Island.
Okay.
No more? Okay. See no other comments?
To the chair?
Mr. Tyrus?
I had a question for Dr. Zega. Do you anticipate making a decision by our next board meeting scheduled for next Thursday, or prior to that, or perhaps post the meeting?
Mr. President, Mr. Harris, conveniently, we have our committee meetings next week, so
Right.
we'll be able to fully dissect the plan that
Okay.
we'll have ready for you. And then, yes, the answer is yes, we hope to have something to present to the board for consideration on Thursday.
All right, fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zega. First of all, I'd like to commend the reentry committee. I mean, they've been working, this is a 7-day-a-week committee. The emails that we've been getting come from all hours of the day and night, Saturdays and Sundays. A lot of good comments. There's definitely it's a super active committee. They've been working on it, and like Dr. Zega said, they come up with a plan, and then when Trenton changes it, we'll meet again and reevaluate, and the whole process starts over. So that committee has been active, God, over the last almost two months.
Since before graduation.
Yeah, so they, I know the public doesn't see a lot going on during the summertime, but the reentry committee meets daily, 7 days a week. We also have the pandemic committee where the board meets once a week, and as the problems arise, we address them, and then we kick them out to the other committees. So it's been a really busy summer for us. We've been on top of it. It's a big district. It's, you know, it's unprecedented. This has never happened before, so pretty much we're writing the rules as we go. And everybody's been doing a good job. I can't commend you enough. You know, the public is involved. We got, you know, parents emailing, you know, coming to the meeting. So, I mean, you know, whatever we have to do to make this work, you know, we're in it together, and we're going to do the best that we can. So, anyone else have any other questions or comments? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion?
Second.
Mr. Mullar, seconded by Mr. Harris. All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it. Thank you.